Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome back to our last section today. We're going to be talking about Microsoft Intra Permission Management. And I do have two great speakers that will join us for the section. So they will introduce themselves for each of the sessions. So I'm really pleased to have Shirley and Brad. So Shirley will cover the session on how to remediate over permissions using intra-permission management, and Brad will go over an update on the commercial program. So before we dive in, I also like to give a very high-level overview of what is CIEM, what is the strategy behind, and also give an initial overview of the products and also how to get started, how to configure it, and also if you're having some POCs or some discussion with your customers, so how you can basically enable the solution in the environment, including activating the trial, which is 90 days. So thank you again for joining us for this last section of the day, and let's get started. So the Entra permission management is in a product category that we call CIEM. So CIEM stands for Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management Solution. So it really does help organizations to analyze the risk. So and also use some key analytics and machine learning and other methods basically to detect anomalies. And once we have, analyzed the risk and we know what are the anomalies in the environment, now comes to the last part, which is really the enforcement, and also making sure that we'll leverage the least privilege approach. So this is the key market category. We do have now several vendors in the market, but so Microsoft acquired a company called CloudNox, which was really also a pioneer in this market, and that's our main topic in this section. Okay, so why do we need a CIEM solution? So Entra permission management really is, of course, a CIEM in the CIEM product category, and also helps to really get the visibility around the identities that are used, in the multi-cloud environment. So these identities can be human identities and can be machine identities. So with the adoption of the cloud, we also do have here some statistics that identities can really 50% increase in identity accessing the cloud over the last couple of year, month. And also, this is maybe the most critical information here. So less than 5% of permission granted are actually used. So this is a very big problem, especially if we are all in the journey of zero trust and leveraging the least privilege approach. It's really critical to making sure that we give just enough permission basically to do the work. Okay, so it's also very important to just try to position here what CIEM is and what CIEM is not, and in a nutshell, what services we can provide with CloudNox, and also what are the other services that may be provided by other solutions that are not necessarily a CIEM. So it's CIEM is focusing primarily on cloud type of infrastructure. So if you do have something on premises, so it won't be the CIEM, but we can have other additional solutions that we can provide to the market. So a CIEM is not a CSPM, even though there will be some links between those two. And in a CSPM, we can leverage some information coming from a CIEM type of solution. But the CIEM is definitely not a cloud vulnerability assessment tool. It's not a CASB module. It's also not, a replacement for a PAM or an EGA solution. And I have a follow-up slides that can really help us really understand where we can really put here basically the CIEM solution. So it's really in the middle, basically of and let me just take my laser pointer here. So we do have privileged access management solution to really manage the credentials, and we will have some session management and some just in time. You have the identity and governance, you have the broader cloud security. So the EPM falls really into the cloud infrastructure, again, data management category. So it's not a permanent EGA, but there are some overlapping capabilities that we can see here. So essentially, the use case that EPM is addressing is really the explosion that user, the permissions that user have in the cloud. And traditional PAM and EGA solution have really not adapted to the elastic nature of clouds, and don't necessarily also provide the fine-grained visibility that we have now, with the CIEM solution. So if you also look at, for example, what are the key, capabilities that we all CIEM solution shall have basically, and slash the entitlement management lifecycle. It all starts, by the entitlement discovery. So discovering the, the inventory of access across, the multi-cloud environment. And again, I just want to stress here that it's not only about the human identity, but also about the machine identity. So if you are thinking about the service principles that are also proliferated in the multi-cloud environment, it's also key to apply the same principle of zero trust to those environments as well. So once we have, discovered the inventory of access, then we will have the threat assessment where we analyze and correlate the cloud privileges and the roles basically to detect any excessive or unused or toxic permission in those environments. So we don't need to be global admin if we are not doing certain tasks, even though in cloud environment, it's maybe just easier to give, the largest permission possible. We have now more than 10,000, I believe, in 10,000 permission in Azure. So sometimes it's just, easier to give the broader role to a particular user, but it's really key to making sure that this user has only the right permission to do the work. So then let's come to the right sizing, because now we have discover, we have the inventory, we have analyzed we use the threat assessment to get and correlate what and identify what are the excessive permission in my environment. And then a CIEM solution should then provide some options, basically to right size the permission and just give, just enough access, and also remove, the permission that really are not necessary based on the usage. And this is one of the key features that we'll also explain in our CloudNox overview. Okay, so once you have, right size the permission, this can be a manual way to do it, but we also could enforce, the automated remediation. And so this can be done, and we have a feature that Sheryl will talk about later, which is our autopilot, which can really help. And last but not the least, you have the monitoring and the governance. So this is really about, it is not only one step and that's it, but it's a continuous, type of workflow where we always do the entitlement discovery, we move through threat assessments, we right size the permission, and we monitor and to see, if there are any variation and any suspicious, action and activities inside my environment, and any anomalies that can be based, for example, machine learning, and making sure, and the example that we usually take is if you never access to a particular server, or if you access only during the daytime, and for some reason you're accessing it during the night and the weekend, this might be a problem. And so you want to be aware of that. And this is really the cyclic type of work, starting with the discovery, going through threat assessment, getting to the privilege right sizing, and monitoring, and starting over again. Okay, so now, what are the the key differentiators in the CIEM market? And so the first one, I think should be really about a strong entitlement discovery. So not being limited only in one cloud provider. I know that some of our competition can give you visibility only on AWS, for example, and not necessarily on Azure and not necessarily on GCP. So it's really key and critical and important that the CIEM solution be able to connect to multi-cloud environment, because this is actually what our customers have today. They are not using only one cloud service provider but multiple. Okay, so having also this comprehensive visibility, so getting insights into permissions across all identity, across all resources, and this identity can be human identity, but again also machine identity. And this part is also very important because some of the competition may only focus, for example, on the human identities and not necessarily the machine identity. And the differentiator number three is being able to leverage machine learning to continuously monitor the activity of a particular user and alerts. This is the example that I take previously. And if there is something fishy, suspicious, and being able to alert the security teams on that. And this can be done by sending an email, or can also be done, for example, by integrating to a CIEM solution, for example. And we will talk about that as well. And the differentiator 4 and 5. The 4 is being able to conduct a rapid remediation. So having the permission right sizing, and also having an option to have just enough permission, but directly from the console. Okay, so if you can do it from the console, you will gain some time, but you can always export the configuration and import them back if you have a Terraform or some sort of DevOps type of platform. But it could also be easier just to leverage the CIEM platform to be able to connect to the cloud service provider and initiate the work without really having to copy and paste some of the commands, and that we also see in other competitors solution. And the solution should be fast and easy to deploy. And to be fair, before the acquisition of CloudNox, to give that example, it was required to have a virtual machine that you will deploy and maintain, that will then connect to the different cloud service providers. But after the acquisition, Microsoft made things really easier to just integrate that to our overall platform, so you no longer really need to have and maintain a virtual machine, that you will log into and that will connect to the different, cloud service providers. So it's now a SaaS type of service, that can connect again to the multi-cloud environment, and that can, just give you this visibility that we really need into the multi-cloud environment. So in a nutshell, this was just high-level overview on what is basically a CIEM solution and what it is not. And it's really important when you are having this discussion with the customers and saying, yeah, there are some similar features with an EGA, but it's not really an EGA solution. And just making sure that you really clarify that the CIEM and the CloudNox that we're gonna talk today is more on the cloud infrastructure and really finding the permission gap, but also with some remediation features and capabilities, and also leveraging machine learning to detect suspicious behaviors in the environment. So let's move in already here to, before we dive in directly to Entra, even though we speak a little bit about it in the CIEM category. So Microsoft Entra Permission Management is a product, but it is also in the Entra family, which really today is the new product family name for Microsoft Identity and Access products. So yeah, it's not a replacement for Active Directory, but it's just a way to say now all things related to identity and access solution now will have the prefix Entra, and we will be focusing today on, again, our intra permission management. Okay, so um, today we really do have, usually, I'm not saying this is the case for all customers, but usually a static approach. Okay, so we grant permission based on the job role and responsibility. So if you are a SecOps, you will get some sort of permissions. If you are a cloud security architect, you will get, another predefined set of permissions depending on the corporate policy. And the admins will also usually manually grant the permission when you join, and without really necessarily having any time bound on it. So if you join the company and you're here for 5 years and you granted the admin role, usually there is not really a mechanism to automatically check if you still need this permission or not. So this is the static approach. So with the CIEM market category and the CloudNox and Entra permission management solution, I should no longer call it CloudNox basically. So the Entra permission management solution, we really think about now a new dynamic approach that will really grant the permission not based on the job role and responsibility, but rather on the historical usage of the activity. So the approach here is to say, if over the last 90 days you didn't really use a certain set of permissions, so maybe you don't really need that on your day-to-day job. So really taking that into consideration, we can just right size basically the permission, and it will not really affect the user, because if you take into consideration the last 90 days and he did not use a specific permission, so if you right size that, this should not be really an issue. But still, we need to give an option, to the admin, for example, to temporarily access, to high risk or high, level of permissions in the organization. If this is, one-time task that he needs to do that required, to elevate his privileges, then it should be able to really provide an option to this particular user, an admin, to be able to do the work and the task. Okay, so the last one here is the next approach here is really to continuously monitor and right size the identity. So remember the cycle that we presented previously. So this is also very, very important. Okay, so most of our customers today, and I would say everybody basically, is also embracing this principle and of zero trust, architecture of zero trust, that have three main principles. So verify explicitly, use least privilege, and assume breach. And you will see that we do have a solution that can help partners and customers to in their journey to the zero trust, because this is not a product that you can buy, but rather is a philosophy, is a framework that you can use, and we do have the solution that can help you in this journey. And one of the components that we are going to talk about today is, on the least privilege approach side of things, that is a core capability that is required if, again, you want to use and embrace the zero trust framework. Okay, so now, what are the capabilities that we provide, with the Entra permission management? So there are mainly three key use cases. So, and they are very aligned with our previous conversation. So, first one is to be able to discover and obtain a comprehensive view of, every action performed by an identity. And again, really doesn't matter if it's only on Azure, if it's on AWS or GCP. And we are also looking at potentially adding additional support for VMware, for example. And so once we have discovered so the ability to be able to right size the permission based on the usage, this is also very critical, and monitor basically if there are any anomalies that we have detected. So during our conversation, our partners, they usually also ask, yeah, so it's not really easy, basically, to say, who will be the buyer of the solution, for the customer, for example, because they may have the security team, they may have the identity and access team. So which team will be using the product, and so which team will have the budgets, basically. So I will really try to clarify here over the last few next minutes, to first, what would be the use case, for example, for the security team, because they really want to be, alerted, basically, if, there are any, threats or any problems that are targeting one of their infrastructure. They want to detect and respond to anomalies. They want to monitor access to infrastructure resources containing sensitive services. So if there are any access to a key vault, for example, or if you have any, other critical infrastructure in the cloud, and there are some permissions that have the users that have permission to access to those infrastructures, yeah, it might be a good idea for a security team to just monitor that and be alerted if there is a problem. So what we say basically is that, yeah, the security team, they definitely need also, to get this understanding of what is going on in infrastructure from the identity side and get alerted. And so in our solution today, you can get, email notification, and we are also heavily working on providing APIs that can just help also integrate in third-party solutions. Also, we are looking at a native integration with Microsoft Sentinel, for example, but this is something that is a work in progress, and we'll be able to share more information really soon. Okay, so the second use case here, and probably these are the team that will use the most the solution. So this is the identity and access management team. So if you have identity and access management practice in organization, or talking with the customer identity and access management team. So these are the guys that usually implement the least privilege policies for human workload and also machine identities. They also usually handle the authorization and review access. They manage all the recertification campaign if you change jobs, if you're joining a new team, and also manage the access lifecycle for all identities. So they may already have some IGA solution that they are using. So these are the team that usually we can really connect and present what are the additional values that we can provide with our CIEM and Entra permission management solution, basically. So this was again a very high level overview of what CIEM is, what CIEM is not, what are the critical capabilities of all CIEM solutions should have, and what are the features that we provide today with our Entra permission management solution. The two key use cases when it comes to the people that will probably get the most benefit from the tool. And so once that we understand what cloud Entra permission management is and what is a CIEM, I also wanted, for the next 10 minutes or so, to just give you a small demo on how you would, for example, set up the Entra permission management solution. So we'll share the slides, so you don't necessarily, need to take a screenshot or anything. But here you can just very easily, enable the Entra permission management trial in your demo tenant, but you can also do it for customers if this is something that they have interest in. And you could also generate, the risk assessments for these customers. And Brad, later on in this call, will also present some of the program that we have that can also help and support our partners to go and have these, risk assessment programs using our cloud Entra permission management to the customer. So if you go to the admin.microsoft.com, you click to purchase, services, you look for Entra permission management, and then you can just click to enable a free trial, and then try now. That's it, basically. This will give you 90 days that you can use if this is a customer-facing type of environment. But I also know that we recently announced that for the demo environment for our partners, it's able to extend one time, the lifetime of the trial, up to 1 year. So if you're having a demo environment, and if you like to extend that demo environment, to 1 year, we have an option, to make that happen. So please just get back to us, and we'll work with you to make that happen. But again, this is only for your trial in your demo environment. This should not be used for any type of customer engagement, basically. Okay, so once you have activated the trial, and then you can just connect to the intra.microsoft.com and browse to the Entra permission management console. This will just redirect you to this application. So you can see that we still have the CloudNox name in it, but I'm sure this will probably change in the near future. So it will just bring you to this page, and to the data collector type of blade, where you can onboard AWS, GCP, and Azure. So I just wanted to show you very quickly, how you can do it on the Azure side, basically. So if you click here, next, I want to onboard, for example, my Azure subscription. So then I'll have several options. I just picked the easiest one, which is to let the CloudNox solution, basically manage everything for you. But please, be informed that you also have the option to just select, some subscriptions that you may want to use, during your assessment, for example. So you have both options. I personally prefer to manage everything from the CloudNox and manage the automatically manage everything. But if for some reason you want really to supervise only a subset of subscription, you can also do that. Okay, and we will give you details of all the PowerShell commands that are required in case you want to do that manually. And after that, you will just click to save and verify. And because I was logging using a user that has the required permission, everything will be taken care in the back end for me. Okay, so then after that, you can see here that my subscription and my Azure tenant is still in the discovery mode. So you just usually take, maybe a few hours, depending on the size of the organization. And after that, I'll really start, getting all the information about my environment, and we'll see that as well in a second. Okay. So the other very quick thing that I wanted to show you today is if you want to onboard also as well, AWS. So you can just go to the collector and select to AWS, and now you also have the option to do that. There are one quick step that you need to do on the Azure infrastructure side, and you have the command here, is to create an application that will take care of all the OIDC type of communication with AWS. But you can do it either by using the command line, or you can go to the Azure AD and the enterprise application, create a new one, and it will basically do the same. You just need to have, if you want to onboard to AWS, for example, you need to have the account ID. And once you click here to launch the templates, it will just open a new window in AWS with all the required field that you just need to confirm. But again, you will also need to have the required permission, basically, on the AWS side of things. Okay, so with that, I also wanted to connect here very quickly in my environment. So this is my same demo environment. So when you connect here, you will have the dashboard that will give you, very quickly, what is your permission creep index, which basically is what is the risk inside the organization. So what is the delta between the permission assigned and the permission used? And based on that, if I look at my so my subscription I think has expired, but let me just move to AWS, and then I can see that I have here 7 identities that have too many permission assigned versus that the permission that we have already used. And if you click here, we will get the details of all the users, the total users, and all the roles, and also the PCI index here. And 100 being the maximum, this means that I'm really not doing here a very good job, in right sizing the permission for my users. And also in this dashboard, I can get here the data about the users that do not have the MFA enabled, the inactive users, and even here some information about some users that could potentially, access secret information in my environment. Okay, so the permission creep index can be the very quick way really to understand, what is the risk in the organization, and you can also track the evolution, during the days, the weeks, the month. And so if you are having, for example, a remediation work that you're doing with your customer, you should see that the index is decreasing over time, and this can be a very good also metric to say that you are going to the right direction, basically. So this is just the dashboard to give a very high-level overview of where we stand when it comes to the permission. And now, if you click here on the permission analytics, here I will see I have a bunch of users that have the permission index at 100. So this is the maximum that you can get. And if, for example, I click here on Alice, I would then, get additional details and additional insights, about the direct policies that has been assigned to this particular user. This is what we can see here. Well, I never log in actually, within this account. So the question remains: why do I have a super user in my environment, but I did not really, never use that account? So in this case, this is a dormant account. This is a potential problem that we need to solve, either by right sizing the permission or even just deleting the user if you don't really use it anymore. Okay, and so here, if you look at the assigned permissions, so in AWS, there is, for this particular user, we have almost 10,000 permission assigned, but we didn't really use anything. So it cannot be worse than that. So just need to make sure that we don't have this type of users in the environment, basically. Okay, so yeah, this was very a high level overview. I know Shelley will talk a little bit about the remediation capabilities that we have, and also she will cover a little bit the reporting. And so with that, because we also do have the partner program that we need to cover later on, I just want to pass the mic back to Shelley. And so she will take us through the remediation capabilities that we have in the Entra permission management. So Shelley, over to you.
Thank you, Samba. Okay, just give me one moment while I share my screen. Here we go. Okay, can you see my screen there, Samba?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent, that's great. Well, hi everyone. My name is Shelley Hill. I'm a global black belt based in the UK, and my focus is on supporting Entra permissions management. So today, let me click on here. To be stuck. There we go. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about how we can use Entra permissions management, or EPM, as I'm going to call it going forward, because it's a bit of a mouthful. So I'm going to be talking about how we can use EPM to remediate the risks that we have across multi-cloud environments. So there are four main remediation capabilities that I'm going to be talking about today. Firstly, we're going to talk about right-sizing identities. And so by that, I mean clipping the permissions on an identity to group, getting my tongue tied, clipping the permissions on an identity or group to what they actually use. So basically reducing that cloud permissions gap that Samba's been talking about. We're also going to look at creating least privileged roles. So how to create a role that's based on the actual activity of a group of users or even on an application. And then thirdly, obviously I've just been saying we're going to be looking at these first two, which are all about how we remove permissions. But then we're going to talk about permissions on demand. So we look at how we can use EPM to give permissions in a time-bound way for our human and our non-human users. And then lastly, we're going to look at a feature in EPM called Autopilot, not to be confused with Intune. This is it's a legacy feature name of Cloud Knox, so you can expect that the feature to evolve, but I think it's worth going into that today as well. All right, so let's get started with permissions clipping or right-sizing identities to start with. Now, before I get to that right sizing, I just want to reinforce what we see in the dashboard here. So Samba has already talked a little bit about the visibility and this dashboard that you see here is available within 24 hours after you enabling EPM. So it takes that 24-hour period or up to that 24-hour period, depending on how much data is in your environment. It takes that time to analyze, and then this is what you will see. You'll have this view of your data. And you can see here I've got AWS is what I'm on at the moment. It could be Azure. I've only got one account ID here connected. And what we're really seeing here is that this permission creep index is telling me how high the risk is in my environment. So that I've onboarded this one account ID, and it's telling me that I have a level of risk in my environment. Now, this level of risk, it's saying this permissions creep index score is 73. And now this is in the red zone of my heat map. It's high on the score. So the permissions creep index is a score between 1 and 100. So 73 is definitely getting into that red zone. And I can see here that it's saying that that there are actually 566 identities that are contributing to my high risk score. So it's really trying to focus in. Naturally, you will have loads of account IDs, so you'd have a lot more either subscriptions or account IDs connected here, and so you would see multiple of these blue bubbles in different sizes. And really, what it's trying to do is by the size and where it's sitting on that heat map, it's trying to identify to you where the biggest risks are. So we can see here 566 contributing to my high risk score, and then down below here I have below this heat map I have this area where it's summarizing the identity and resource findings that are just being highlighted to me as a risk in my environment. Now, I just want to point out this whole dashboard is actually a summary of the permissions analytics report, which I'm going to show you now. Now, this report is available on demand, and it provides an overview of access that's been granted to your users and your identities and your groups. So it summarizes the usage of cloud resources in your environment. And it's using the permissions creep index to quantify your organization's threat, risk, and level of exposure. Now, there are a number of categories here that I will obviously need to investigate in my permissions analytics report. It's saying here I've got, I'll have externally accessible containers, I'll have inactive identities, I'll have open network security groups. But today we are specifically looking at remediation capabilities within the EPM. So the first thing I'm going to look at is my over-permissioned active identities. Now, here I can see my identities in this report here. They have a high permissions creep index. So I've got quite a few identities here, and it's giving me this view. I've got, actually these ones they're all showing here as having a score of 99, so at the top end of that permissions creep index score, and we can see why. Marudala here, for example, has over 10,000 permissions available, and she's only actually used 4 in the last 90 days. So the difference between what these users have versus what they use is certainly a very large cloud permissions gap, and why they're being highlighted as over-permissioned identities. So when I dive into one of those users, just to investigate, what roles do they have, and what can I find out about what they've been doing, I can really see exactly what permissions this user has executed in the last 90 days. So I've chosen this user here. They have used 1 out of the over 12,000 permissions that they have available, and we can see that this user has roles directly assigned to them. So and they also have permanent access. So this, if they'd been assigned by a group, it would tell us what group they're assigned by, but for this particular user, they're directly assigned, and it's permanent access, it's standing access. So with the size of this user's cloud permissions gap, and their standing access to these permissions, we can see why they're flagged as a risky user, as an over-permissioned user. And we also have this visibility with our non-human identities as well. So you can see this for your managed identities and your service principals. And now we get to, so I guess the point of this session, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to right-size these users? So one of the remediation options we have in EPM is to right-size or clip the permissions of groups and users and applications and managed identities. So under remediations and then under permissions, we can use this filter up the top here to identify our over-permissioned active identities. There we go. So we can flick between whether we want a group, user, application, or managed identity that we want to look at, and we can select the role assigned to the identities. So I've got a managed identity here. Having some clicking issues today. There we go. So yeah, so we can basically select one of these roles that are assigned to this managed identity, and then we can use these quick actions that are on the right here to appropriately revoke access. So we could revoke tasks or remove an entire role. It could be that we want to remove, just the delete tasks that are available for this user. For this managed identity that I have here, though, I want to revoke all of the unused permissions that it has. So I want to use this one here. Maybe it's because I'm using laser pointer. It doesn't like it. Just going to swap. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I want to, I'm going to revoke all those unused permissions when I click that revoke unused tasks. So I can either execute this from the portal. So I can, if I click execute now, it's going to revoke all those unused tasks from this user. Or if I don't want to do that, if I don't want to run it from this portal, I can download this script here where it says generate script. I can inspect it and I can run it in the Azure command line myself if I want to. So you can download the script even if you haven't enabled Entra permissions management to do remediation in your environment. So if you haven't enabled the controller, you can still have the script so that you can run those scripts. So what this script actually does, whether it's the same script, whether it's being run by yourself or by EPM, what it does is it removes the role that was assigned to your user. So it removes that ACR image signer role that it has there. And what it does is it actually creates a custom role for that user that only contains the permissions that the user has executed in the last 90 days. Or, as I said, if it was, if I'd use the high risk task or revoke delete task, it only puts in those permissions that you're saying that you want it to have. It doesn't actually make a change to the built-in roles themselves. So you're quite safe in that you're not actually changing not modifying built-in roles. It's just creating a custom role that only contains what the user has actually used. So this is a really good way of dealing with specific over-permissioned individuals, whether they might be users themselves, or maybe there are specific groups that are over-permissioned. Because remember, we can have this approach with whole groups, but certainly this is a good way of removing over-permissioned access from those non-human users who tend to have permissions that are less need to be less flexible, if you know what I mean. We can see very clearly what those managed identities, those non-human users, actually use regularly and what they actually need. And they tend not to deviate too much. So now we're just going to talk about looking at creating least privileged roles. So creating a role that's based on the actual activity of a user or a group of users or an application. So we were just looking at how we individually right-size users or groups with managed identities, how we can individually take back access that isn't being used. And whereas now what we're thinking about doing is just creating a role based on actual activity. So here we are under remediation and then roles or policies. And we can have this approach for Azure, AWS, GCP. The reason it's called roles/policies is because in Azure we call them roles, and in AWS we call it policies. So I'm actually going to show you how we can do this for both platforms. Here we can use these filters again to look at the permissions in custom and in built-in roles. So what this actually tells us is it tells us who these roles are assigned to, and we can see here that the actual permissions available, groups that's assigned to, enterprise applications that's assigned to, who's indirectly assigned to. So we have this this good visibility of how those roles are actually being used. But what we're actually going to look at now is how we can create a true least privileged custom role. So if we click on Create Role, and then we're given some options here. So we can choose between subscriptions or accounts if we're talking about AWS, and then we can choose if we want to create a role based on the actual activity of users or groups or an application or from an existing role. So we might have a team of people in mind, like my dev team. They're so over permissioned. I just don't want to create them each custom role though, because that seems extreme. I don't need 10 different custom roles. I just want one role that will be suitable, a least privileged role for my whole team. And also my team is growing. So when a new person joins my team, how do I know what's going to be the most appropriate role to give them and of what they actually are going to need on a day-to-day basis? So here, I'm actually able to choose the people who are in my dev team. So I'm going to do it by activity of users. I'm doing it by, I'm choosing a couple of people in my dev team that I want to base this role on. And I'm going to base this role on the tasks that they've performed in the last 90 days. So we have this option up here. Okay. Now I'm going to validate that, here I'm going to validate that what is actually available in this role. So this is what my users have actually used. But what I can do also is I can customize this a bit. I say, do you know what? Actually, I still want them to have this extra role. Or do you know what? I don't really like them being able to delete these. So I'm going to take that away. So we can do some customization here. And then we can see where, this is the final page for creating this. So what we can do is we can check those permissions that a user will have once that the role will have once we've created the role. And I can either click submit right here, or I can choose to have a look at the JSON file. I could download this JSON file and download the script, and I could run it myself using the Azure command line. So it's very transparent. Those roles, those selected tasks that are listed under that earlier tab, that's exactly what is listed here in this just JSON file. It's just made it easy for me. I've not had to go through and do that myself. It's just made it nice and quick and easy. These are exactly the permissions that my dev team users have been using over the last 90 days. So this is what's going to be included in the role. And as I said, I can run that from here or from the Azure command line. And now that I have this role created, I can use it just like I would, any other role that I would have created, except that it is truly based on least privilege. And really, this might be an approach that you could apply with your project teams or business units or users that really just have common access requirements. That they are over permissioned. You want a right size, but you don't want to be too granular in that right sizing. Now, I also just wanted to show you, while we're creating a custom policy, what it looks like for AWS, because there are differences, but you'll see it really is the same process, and you have that same approach. So you can see, first of all, here that we do have that same visibility as we do for Azure, and we can see that the tasks assigned to the policy here, and who has that policy assignment. And if we click on create policy like we would with Azure, we have this same approach to creating a new role. So we can create a policy. Actually, I'm creating a policy based on the activity of a group this time, and now this time it takes all the permissions that the identities. It takes the permissions, all of the identities that were given by these groups. So you've got a group with a number of identities available, all of the identities that in that group, the permissions that they've actually used in the last 90 days, that is what this role is going to be based on, the activity of the permissions executed by those group members. So this time, instead of the last 90 days, I'm going to say I want this role to be based on the activity, the group users activity from the last 30 days. So click next. And now we can customize this policy if we want to. We can add or remove some more tasks, and we can also scope this policy to specific resources, as you can see here. So we can really scope it. And at this point, we customize the statement. You may have spotted that it does say offline here. My controller is disabled, which means that the EPM for my AWS account, it doesn't have permissions to execute remediation tasks. And that's okay. We can still go through this process, because just like it does with Azure, I can actually still download the JSON file and the script that we need to create this custom policy. So you can actually see here that the submit button is faded out here. So I couldn't submit it, but I can still generate the script required for the policy. And we can actually also, with this one, we see the little edit function here, we can edit this JSON file from here also if we needed to. So anyway, that's just a slight point of difference. I wanted to make sure they gave you a view on how you can easily create custom roles or policies with the same approach for AWS and Azure, and you can also have this same approach for GCP. Okay, so we've created a custom role based on actual activity, and we've removed access from identities. So we've done, so there's removing here, and now I wanted to have a look at how we can use EPM to give time-bound permissions for our human and our non-human identities. Okay, so permissions on demand is a just-in-time capability that enables permission elevation across AWS, Azure, and GCP. So it's not just Azure; it is multi-cloud permissions on demand. And this is a really important capability, because especially if there is an aversion to, say, right-sizing user access or creating custom roles, then at the very least you can still use EPM to remove the role, remove that standing access, and lean into just-in-time permissions. Sometimes it's not necessarily appropriate, different use cases, different scenarios. It's not necessarily appropriate to create a custom role or to create or to right size individuals, but it doesn't mean that identities should be over permission in the terms of their standing access. So we can remove the standing access from the role, and you really lean in to these just-in-time permissions. And I'm going to show you about how granular we can really be with this and how usable it can be. But first, what we need to do is click on this new request. And so here we can choose the authorization system and the scope of the request, including who the request is for. So you can do it on behalf of a user. And as I said, it's not only a capability for users, human users, but it's also those non-human identities. So if you have managed identities, perhaps you have scheduled tasks, then you can use this to provide just-in-time access for those identities as well. So we can be very specific on what we want this identity to have permissions for. So we can request built-in roles or custom roles, or maybe a specific task. And this is ideal if you do have a scheduled task, because we have visibility. So we know exactly what permissions a scheduled task it has, what is required. Sometimes they have the contributor role, and actually they're only using, say, 5 of the permissions on that whenever that scheduled task is run. So really highly over permission, and usually it's standing access. So we can actually be very granular and say, we want this scheduled task to only have, we could choose this middle option here. We could say specifically these 5 tasks. And what I've selected here is a template. Now, reason I selected this template is slightly different from role or a task. A template, it's essentially an entitlement package, and this is something that you might use for a specific team. It's a collection of roles or tasks that you want to package up and have available. So similar to what you might be familiar with in terms of entitlement packages in Azure, but this is a capability in permissions on demand as well. So that means you can use this with AWS and GCP also. So next, we can review the permissions and the scope of the request, and we can and now we can get to the point where we actually schedule the request. So this could be a one-off task. It could be as I said, that scheduled task. Maybe it runs every Wednesday and Friday at 4:15, and it's a task it runs for 2 hours. And this is where we can be very granular on timing. So not only are we saying, they can only have these specific 5 tasks available, but it can only have those tasks for this 2-hour period during, twice a week, and then we want those tasks to be removed. So there's 0 standing access. And that means that we, as I said, we remove that the situation where we have, those sorts of non-human identities with standing access to the contributor role, just because it was too hard to identify what was actually needed. Now, just while we're talking about permissions on demand as well, I do get asked quite often about why you'd use permissions on demand when you're already using Azure PIM. Now, Azure PIM, as we know, it is for Azure AD roles, Azure roles, and for common privilege elevations in Azure, right? But the value of EPM, the permissions on demand, it's the value it adds is that it's multi-cloud. So you can have this just-in-time access for GCP and AWS elevations. You can also use it for, whether we're talking about Azure, AWS, or GCP, you can use it for ad hoc privilege escalations without that need to have to be, set up as eligible for that role first. So it allows you to, it can be a more spontaneous request process. It also has that ability to, as I've just been showing you, to be very granular in terms of the permissions, so very specific about the tasks or roles, and to be very specific in terms of scheduling. So so again, whether it's humans or on behalf of service accounts, we can be very specific in terms of when those permissions are going to be available. So definitely, depending on your, the way you're set up, your different use cases that customers have, is definitely a case for a better together, and it's an appropriate, and the appropriate tool will depend on those use cases and scenarios, but they certainly can complement each other and your processes. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at an EPM feature called Autopilot. Now, as I said, it's not to be confused with Intune. This was an original feature of Cloud Knox, and so you will, can definitely expect a rename. But I thought it was really important to talk about this with you, so you understand, what it is and how it, might develop. Now, what Autopilot actually is a developing feature that is limited at the moment, but it essentially is a way to automate specific remediations. So if I just click on a new rule. Now, at the moment, it only has this one rule for automated resizing. It's like what I've been showing you with permission remediation in terms of when we go into, actually right sizing those users individually. But this rule allows you to do it in a broader context, and but this particular rule is limited to service principals and managed identities at the moment. So when we jump into the rule, now what this actually does, it allows me to create a rule that will generate recommendations on unused applications and managed identities. So, I can set the length of time, the time lapse. Maybe I want to remediate these identities if they've been unused for 30 days or 90 days or 60 days. There is the capability to change that length of time. But really what it's doing here is it's generating recommendations in terms of those inactive, is highlighting what those inactive applications and unmanaged those managed identities. And then here under apply recommendations, it tells me that these specific identities haven't been used, and I can either mark them as read only, or I can remove any write actions from the identity. So I don't necessarily want to, fully disassociate them. I don't want to fully shut them down, but I do want to remove any write actions from these identities so that they can't do damage to my environment. So it's just a bulk way of reviewing and remediating these unused identities. There is also an unapply recommendations feature. So if I did want to undo my changes, it will allow me to do that. So I would say this is quite an advanced use. I mean, as I said, the role here, there's only one rule in terms of autopilot at the moment. But I would say autopilot in general there's quite an advanced usage of EPM. I expect many of our customers will really hover in the visibility and monitoring areas and the other remediations that I've shown you today already. But I really just wanted to give you this overview so you're aware at least that this feature exists and what it actually does. Okay, so today I have focused on remediation specifically, but there are two other components that Samba has talked about already, and that's the visibility and the monitoring. So EPM provides that granular visibility across cloud platforms, so which I showed you earlier on this session with the dashboard and with the permissions analytics report. But it also provides the ability to monitor and alert on anomalous use. And so you can learn about suspicious activity as soon as it happens, thanks to anomaly detections, and we can actively track usage profile deviations. So like if you've got an identity that's been accessing a high-risk resource, or the permissions that have been used are suddenly increasing, or maybe there's an abnormal form of access, like it's an odd time of day, or it's from a new IP address. So you can be automatically alerted to any potential anomalies or suspicious of behavior, and then you can remediate action on that. Again, depending on what that alert is, but it might be that you might have to look at some of the remediation features within EPM to sort of reduce those risks around your environment. But then finally, of course, what I was showing you today were those capabilities. This in the middle here, there's capabilities here that provide a simplified way to reduce over-permissioned access, and so certainly influence an organization's permissions management strategy by enforcing true least privilege. We've got a lot of customers who are looking at having that least privilege approach, and this is a way of actually providing that real least privilege access, particularly to maybe reducing group access and particularly those non-human identities as well, which has always been a difficult one to track. So today we specifically looked at 4 remediation capabilities. There was the right sizing and identity or group permissions based on what they actually use, so reducing that cloud permissions gap. Secondly, we looked at creating least privileged roles, so creating a custom role that's based on activity of a group of users or even an application. And then we turned it around by looking at how we can use permissions on demand in a time-bound way for human and non-human identities. And then lastly, we looked at the feature called Autopilot for generating recommendations on unused applications and managed identities. So thank you very much for listening to me in this session. I hope that's been of some use to you. And I'm going to now hand you back over to Samba.
All right. Thank you very much. That was very, very, very helpful. Thank you very much, Shelley. So, yeah, so we talk about the Entra permission management solutions, the overview, the remediation capabilities, even autopilot, which usually is a really new feature that we are also developing. So that's great. So our next session today will be with Mr. Brad Gouzier that will give us a presentation of what's the partner programs that are available today, commercial program. So yeah, Brad, over to you, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Samba, and well done, Shelley. Let's switch over here, and if you folks could verify that you're seeing the deck, we will go into presentation mode.
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, sorry, folks. There we go. All right, great.
Yeah.
So last session, folks, right? You've made it this far. Congratulations. I know it's been a long morning or afternoon for you folks. I'm actually based in the US, so still AM here. But I really appreciate everyone, and this is the last session. I promise it won't be very long, but we do want to discuss what's in it for the partners, right? I am on the Senior Business Strategy Manager on the incubation team with Samba, and we help partners, like partners that are on this call now, to really get introduced to these incubation loads, and Entra being one of those. I actually came over from CloudKnox. I'm actually the only one on this call that actually was there from the beginning, way back in 2019. And we quickly knew that in able to scale this product, we could not do it without the help of partners. And so myself and one other gentleman, we formed the partner team there, and we went out and basically helped to recruit partners to help us move the product along, because we couldn't have done it without them. So today what I'm going to get into is, what's in it for partners, right? Why be engaged here? And it was a different model in the CloudKnox days. We typically saw partners that were actually reselling licenses. We know that's a little bit of a different model here, where many times licenses may go through enterprise agreements. In some cases, though, they do flow through partners. But beyond that, right, what's in it for the partner, right? And of course, Shelley hinted on this, as did Samba, and that is, right, the actual engagements, running POCs, or as we call them, risk assessments, and helping your clients to really right size their environment. So in a pre-sales motion here, right, we're generating interest, right? Sort of what we're doing on this event today, right? But secondly is to create the intent, right? And we want you folks to engage in partner workshops. And in fact, we've got funds to support that. Some of those we call as an ESIF fund. And I'm actually going to kind of open the hood up and show you what we've now brought to the ESIF program. I think many of you folks are familiar with that, right? And customer incentive funds. So the funds, while they are for your clients, they actually will flow to the partner. So they'll help you to reduce that final price to your clients. And the whole point here is to literally get your client to engage in that risk assessment, and if they follow all the check boxes and perform the full assessments, then the money comes over in the form of an SOW to the partner and can be used for these engagements. So I'm really going to focus more so on the pre-sales part here, and then the post-sales stuff, that's kind of Shelley stuff there. So let's talk about the risk assessment overview, because this is really the crux of it. This is where you're really going to generate the interest from your clients. And In fact, while we're doing this too, I'm even going to ask a poll in a few minutes here to help see if the partners that are on can actually help us to, as we create and define our strategy around risk assessments. So apologies if Samba or Shelley have probably touched on this in some aspect here, but what we want to understand is that the risk assessment is really powerful. And I think I'd like to give you a real example too, because I did come from the original CloudKnox team. And one of our partners, a large partner, a global partner, as a matter of fact, they came to us with a client. This client was a pharmaceutical client. And they said, you know, ex-client here, they really need to get a handle excuse me, on their identity, specifically visibility into permissions and, you know, who's over permissioned, as Shelley mentioned. And so we were invited to meet that client. Again, to Shelley's point, it's multi-cloud, right? Yes, we're an Azure organization, right? We drink our Azure water. However, it's a multi-cloud product, right? And when we were CloudKnox, we would actually deploy a connector, if you will, into each cloud, one for Azure, one for AWS, one for GCP. That's no longer necessary, right? We've moved more to a centralist type of architecture where we'll pull all that data right through Azure. We actually leverage a technology there called OIDC, which from my API gateway days was OpenID Connect. So I think that's what it still is. And so it's really important now that we're pulling all that data right through Azure. So it's an even easier deployment. But back to that pharmaceutical, a top 10 global pharma, I might add. We literally stood up the product in one day, and that was 3 clouds, not just one. And know too that your clients don't need to be an Azure client today, right? They can be a GCP or AWS. We can still make the connection and pull that through an Azure tenant, but they don't need to be an Azure client today. So we'll get into the engagement call, define the scope as we did with this one. We literally ran the tool for one day. So imagine a top 10 pharma running a tool for one day, collecting all that data, right? In that one day, it looks back 90 days. So we capture that 90 days of data, and then we're literally able to bring that to the executive team about a day later. So imagine that wrapping up an assessment, and you'll see where I'm going with this relative to the timing I'm mentioning when I put up a quick survey for you folks here. And then during the assessment, of course, is the envision part where you'll set up the permission management. And this is where you discover all those overprivileged identities. I took a note from Shelley. Imagine using 4 out of 9,000 permissions. Those were actual numbers that, and are actual numbers that we see every day as we perform these risk assessments. And then after you're set up, discovering all the identities, the impact of the resources, then we'll design and create a strategy to get your client, you know, out of that over-permissioned state, and from there, turn on the remediations. And it's pretty, I can share this too from the assessments I've seen over the years. We won't turn on autopilot day one, right? You don't want to just start auto remediating, right? Let's first discover what the environment looks like. What is that PCI score, right? That privilege creep index, which came from the days of Balaji Preemi and CloudKnox. Let's define that. Let's see how overprivileged these identities and roles are, and then take action from there. Okay, I promised you a poll. You can't click on the screen here, so look at the chat, folks, and you should see this question pop up. We'd like to ask our partners on the call today, how long do you think the Entra risk assessment should be? 30, which actually was the CloudKnox length of time, 45, 60, or 90. 90 being the Microsoft, that's kind of a standard for a risk assessment time here. We are actually discussing internally, right? Should we shorten that? Or so we'd love your input, folks. If you can, click on the link in the chat. Hopefully you didn't click here because it shouldn't do anything. And if you can share those, we'll be happy to post those results. We won't say how many. We won't say what you actually put up, but we'll just give an overall percentage of what people are saying here. So I appreciate if anybody can help us there. In a format like this, it really helps us to reach a larger audience. So what are the benefits of the risk assessment, right? So here's where you can design and plan that mitigation strategy, right? So as Shelley did, right, discovered all those potential risk related, and then you improved it, how it can address the mitigation or this permissions gap. Permissions gap is real. We've yet to find a client that didn't have this, and I can assure you that Global Pharma did in fact have privilege creep in all 3 of the clouds that we did provision the product in. And then sometimes the plan is, okay, maybe we start with one cloud. Maybe we'll start with Azure and get things cleaned up there. Or perhaps it's an overall strategy to work all 3 clouds together, as Shelley and Samba showed you is possible within the console. Reduce complexity for those IAM security teams to manage. We actually have a slide on the sales side that we would present to clients, and sometimes literally an entire meeting or first meeting with a prospect would be done with one slide. And that slide said, how are you doing this today? How are you gathering these artifacts around over-permissioned? How many people have access to as a super admin, right? That's very popular. How many identities are no longer even associated with the firm? And so if you think about how you can actually reduce that complexity, we actually met with a very large manufacturer on the East Coast here in the US early on. They had 10,000 roles and permissions. And across a team of, I think, about 10 folks, they told us that at an average of 2.5 hours per permission, that it would take them about 2 years, if you do the math, to actually remediate against all those. We fired up the then known as CloudKnox, now Entra, and we're able to complete that work in under 2 weeks. So really powerful statement as to how you can reduce that complexity for those security teams, and then plan to move into it and recommendations to move on. So I hope that's helpful. Again, just trying to help you understand the real value of the risk assessment. So who are your stakeholders? Security decision makers, right? No brainer here. The C-suite, the CISO, right? These are folks that you want to, in the case of that Global Pharma, right? We presented this information back to that CISO, or even the CIO, and you can read the other roles here that are typical, and likely that you do have very high level relationships within your clients. So just wanted to share that as well. We actually have a risk assessment kit, and please contact us if you'd like to get access to this. And here's where you're going to get, you know, some readiness content across all 3 clouds, streaming permission management across multi-cloud infrastructure, so even a trial playbook. So some really nice content here delivered by the sales and marketing team here, and even an FAQ. So this is just one of the tools that we've built up. One slide on MISA here too. If many of you folks on now, or perhaps all of you are members of the MISA ecosystem, right? This is where you essentially kind of integrate with a Microsoft solution, right? The opportunities within MISA are actually, there it is, Entra, and then Endpoint Manager, Purview, Priva, and even Defender and Sentinel. So those are some of the other workloads. In fact, my team handling Entra and Priva as 2 of the incubations that still sit within our team. And of course, we support the ISVs, MSSPs, and the MXDR partners as well. So I just wanted to give a shout out. In fact, we just got, we had an update from the MISA team yesterday, and I took a note. If anyone's interested, there is a MISA summit in Miami. So if anyone wants to go to Miami when it gets a little bit chilly, December 6th through 8th, look for that. Or perhaps if you're not in the organization and you want to get to Miami, maybe you can sign up and join MISA. So just a shout out to our friends at MISA. But I'll conclude with some details or some greater information around ESIF. And help me folks here too, if Jeff Chin is on, this is his baby. So I did invite him. I'm not sure if he's on live, but if you've got any questions, he's available to answer those, and really knows the inner workings and the details around the ESIF program. The last time I did an an airlift was back in April, and we did not have the ESIF funding at that point. But now I'm happy to tell you that we've actually got the program delivered, and this is a way of helping pre and post sales engagements. The goal is to have you agree upon an SOW with your clients, and that allows you to kind of set some milestones or some guidelines as to what we can do relative to helping the client with some funding from Microsoft to engage in assessment and kind of move that along. I won't get into the details here. Don't worry about the ROI stuff and the Microsoft stuff or who's entering it or whatnot, but we want you to know that there's actually, and I was asked to share this from Jeff, there's 300K in this program. So it is a first come, first serve. You'll see when I get to the next slide about how much money you can actually extract per opportunity. And so if you do the math, you realize that that money could go quickly, where our intent is to kind of use that up this year, and then hopefully there'll be some new fresh funding coming in January, which is still our fiscal year, but the second half, obviously. Let's get into it. And I know this is a little bit of an eye chart here, but I've highlighted what I really want you to focus on right here in the create value section. So this is our actual ESIF guidelines here. And under EPM in the second column that I've highlighted, I really want to focus on option 2 here, because this is where it can really be beneficial to you. If you do engage with a client to perform a risk assessment, okay, it's 10K up front. However, there's other things like connecting to a CIEM, which we know that's not possible today. That's coming, right? Adding additional IDPs coming as well, but connecting to additional clouds with 200 resources, $2,500. Perform a workshop for 2 days, which is really what you folks do, right? That's how you guys make a living. 6K. So if I had 10, 6, and 25, $18,500 available now for doing a 2-day risk assessment with your client. So think about how valuable that could be to be able to bring those funds into an engagement. So again, 18,500 available today. Watch for the integrations. I know a lot of you are asking, what about ServiceNow? It's coming, I promise you. I don't have an exact date, but as one of the most highly integrated solutions into Entra, or what then previously CloudKnox, imagine a developer wanting access to an environment on a weekend from 10 to 12, like Shelly said, that permissions on demand. Why not grant that? Why not just do it through ServiceNow, API over to the Entra platform, grant that permission, but take it down. And trust me, I helped a Fortune 100 insurance company here in the Northeast. And the first thing that we did once we lit it up, if you will, was we discovered some identities that were no longer even worth the organization. So imagine that you've got folks that don't even work for this said insurance company, and yet still have access, right? That it's very easy to grant that full admin access, especially from a cloud infrastructure perspective. So know that that low-hanging fruit's out there for you. So again, apologize for the eye chart here, but know that the funding is now available, and we'd love for you folks to take advantage of it. There's a workflow there. And then this can be done with Shelly's team, the GBB team can help with this, and we can also help to engage with your Microsoft selling team. Finally, an older slide I wanted to bring back. This is purely an example of how you might structure your services. We actually created this back in the CloudKnox days and have brought it into the Entra or Microsoft days here. So know that this is not a set of pillars here. Many clients that we talk to move things around in different fashion here, but engage, deploy, transform, and operationalize, right? These are the 4 pillars that we saw when we talked to many partners early on. In the engage portion, right? Of course, that's when you're going to engage with a client, do some initial analysis, and a kind of a controls assessment here, right? And we'll talk about, hey, well, what are we going to tie this into? Are we going to tie into access control, PAM, and maybe even some IGA solutions? Then deploy, right? Install and configure. So here's where you get that assessment deployed and really get that that policy framework, right? We know the GSIs, they love that term. And then here we can do our integrations, which are coming, right sizing, and I won't read everything, folks, but you can see work into transformation here. Big one in transformation, there's your automation, right? And know that the tool set will come back. We had that back in the CloudKnox days, and we'll bring those capabilities back here from the Entra side. So know that we're working to bring those back. And then finally, keeping it operationalized, right? Run book, monitor, all the things that you're doing today with your clients. So that's folks here. I'm happy to share this slide if anybody wants to help build their services. In fact, my team is responsible for helping you to launch your services on the Azure Marketplace. So please do raise your hand if you'd like help. There are already existing offers today from many of our partners relative to Entra, and we'd like to help you to get yours added there as well. So thanks. So guess what, folks? You've made it. You're there. This is the end of my section. I'm going to go back to Samba for a wrap up, but we really appreciate you. And I wanted to do a quick shout out too. Thank you to Team Triple Play. We've got Paulette and Liz who helped to make this all happen. So thank you, ladies, very much. And Paulette, I hope I was on camera the whole time for you. Thanks very much.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Brad. Very useful information. I also want to say to our partners that they can reach out to us, the SPD team, security partner, business development team. So myself, Brad, Frank, Catherine, that you may know if you need any help on how to get started with the risk assessment program. We'll also be planning a specific training around the risk assessment program. So also watch out for that. We'll be more than happy to support you. So again, Frank also talked about this morning about the risk assessment program for Defender for IoT. So yeah, there are really some opportunities here to get a share of the $300,000 dollars that's available. So yeah, if you want to get started with the risk assessment, being Defender for IoT or Entra, or the potential one that will come around Defender for IoT and Defender for CIEM, please feel free to reach out to our team. So thank you all very much for your time and for attending this session. It has been a very long day for some of you guys, so we really appreciate that you stay with us until the end of the day, and we remain available really for any questions, any follow-up questions that you may have. Thank you very much, Shirley. Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Paulette. Thank you, everybody. And let's keep the discussion going. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.